Hello and welcome to Penny's Playtime. This is my first episode of this podcast. I am very happy to be starting. This podcast is going to be about serial killers, true crime, anything spooky, really. If you have any recommendations on what you'd like me to talk about in my next one or in future podcasts, please drop a comment down below. This week, I am going to be covering Ed Gein. Shout out to Damon for guessing it correctly. At the end of this podcast, I will be releasing 3 hints as to the serial killer that I have chosen to cover next week. If you guess correctly in the comments based off of the 3 hints, you'll get a shout out in my next episode. But this week, like I said, I decided to do Ed Gein. He is possibly one of my favorite serial killers. I've found him fascinating. And it's not just me who find him fascinating. I mean, he's been the basis for multiple movies, characters, TV shows, even some songs. And he's probably one of the most infamous serial killers out there. He was born August 27th of 1906. He was born in La Crosse County, Wisconsin, to George Philip Gein and Augusta Wilhelmine. God, I'm never going to pronounce her middle name right, Gein. And he had one older brother named Henry. So a little bit about his dad. His dad was an alcoholic. He was unable to hold down a job. But when he did work, he did odd jobs, like he was a carpenter, a tanner. At one point, he was even an insurance salesman. And their mother absolutely loathed their father because of the fact that he was an alcoholic, the fact that he was unable to hold down a job, and I really can't blame her. He also owned a grocery store, but he wound up selling it. Shortly after he sold it, the family moved far away from the city to a 155-acre farm in Plainfield, Wisconsin. Now, being out there, Augusta got the perfect chance to mold her sons. Like, imagine a mother who literally wants to instill all of her views and all of her fears in the world into her child or children, given this perfect opportunity of just absolute isolation. There was nobody around, and anybody that did come around, she turned them away completely. If there was anybody that could have influenced them, she completely turned them away. Ed actually only left home to go to school. Now, when he wasn't at school, he mostly just spent his time doing chores around the farm and spending time with his mother. Augusta's main tool of controlling her sons and influencing her sons was her religion. She was a very, very religious woman. She was Lutheran, and she always preached to them about the evils of drinking, ironically enough, with her husband being a drunk. And perhaps one of the biggest factors that she had in shaping Ed into the person that he would become, into the killer that he would become, was the fact that to her, any woman beside herself, of course, was essentially a prostitute and used as the devil's pawns to lure any men in. This woman basically tried to teach her sons that any woman aside from her was just evil, to stay away from them, have nothing to do with them, and just avoid them at all costs. So when Ed did attend school, though, he was described as really shy, kind of an introvert. A lot of people also said that he had really strange behaviors. The most noted of his strange behaviors, though, was that he would just randomly laugh, as if he was laughing at his own jokes, which later in life he gets diagnosed as schizophrenic. So I think that this was probably one of the early signs of said schizophrenia. I myself think that he might have had some sort of dissociation disorder, possibly even a personality disorder. But his mother actually tried to punish him if he ever tried to make friends at school. So if she found out that he was making friends, or that, he was basically having any link to the outside world that would show him a different view than his mother's, she would punish him. Now, even though he was without a doubt completely socially isolated, he actually did really well in school, especially in reading. And I think that people like Ed, who are stuck at home and they don't have very much social interaction, and are influenced so heavily by somebody as manipulative as his mother, I think that reading really proves to be an escape for somebody like that. So I think that's probably why he excelled so much in reading. Now, in April of 1940, his father died of heart failure at 66 years old, and this heart failure was due in large to his alcoholism. Now, because of this, the family went through a bit of a financial strain, so Ed and Henry began doing odd jobs around town. And oddly enough, residents of Plainfield actually described the two as being very honest and reliable. That was one huge thing about Ed, is anybody who had met him said that he was very charming. He seemed very normal, just a bit of an introvert, but he seemed, relatively normal. Nobody really thought that he was capable of doing the things that he did. Ed, I think this is one of the weirdest facts that I found out about him, but he actually frequently babysat for his neighbors, and he actually seemed really happy doing this babysitting, because it seemed to the people around him that he was able to relate to children easier than he was adults. So he actually really enjoyed babysitting kids. It was around this time that his brother had started dating. He got involved with a divorced single mother of two with intent to move in with her. Now, because of this, he was starting to develop, kind of a disattachment to his mother. He was starting to grow up and be independent and want to be on his own. But Ed, on the other hand, was still very deeply attached to their mother. So Henry started to show a little bit of concern with Ed's attachment. And Henry would frequently talk very badly about their mother. And Ed would just get so offended, he'd get hurt, and he'd get really angry at Henry for talking so badly about their mother. In May of 1944, Henry and Ed were burning away some marsh vegetation on their farm, and then the fire supposedly got out of control. The local fire department arrived, they extinguished the fire, and then they left. And shortly thereafter they left, Ed had reported Henry as missing. A few people got together, a search party was created, they looked all over for Henry. They eventually found his dead body lying face down. It was discovered that he had actually been dead for some time. Now, they couldn't see any burns on him, any apparent injuries. It wasn't a very obvious cause of death, so they chalked it up to an apparent heart failure. It was later discovered that Henry had bruises on his head. Now, even though it's not much, there was still a little bit of evidence of foul play, but the police completely ignored any possibility of foul play, and the coroner officially listed the cause of death as asphyxiation. Now, authorities accepted this theoretical accident. No official investigation or autopsy was ever conducted. However, some do suspect that Ed killed Henry. Now, this makes it kind of interesting, because if that's the case, then Ed's years active as a serial killer would be from 1944 until right around 1957, opposed to, I think it was 1947 that some people had said he had started his killings. Now, Henry being dead, Henry's death made it that much easier for Augusta to kind of sink her hooks a little bit deeper into Ed, because at this point his dad was dead, his brother was dead, there was nobody else around to influence him in any way except for his mother. However, shortly after Henry's death, Augusta had a serious stroke, and Ed devoted everything in him to taking care of her and making sure that she was okay. During 1945, he and Augusta had visited a man that is known only by the name of Smith to buy straw. According to Ed, his mother had witnessed Smith abusing a dog. Now, a woman had come from inside of the house She came out and begged Smith to stop. However, Smith had beat this dog to death. Now, normally any person witnessing something like this would be completely traumatized, like seeing an animal of any sort, not just a dog, but literally any animal of any sort being beaten to death is bound to have some negative traumatizing toll on someone. However, Augusta was only bothered by the presence of the woman who came out of the house. She had told Ed that this woman wasn't Smith's wife, so she essentially had no reason to be there. She even went so far as to call her Smith's harlot. Soon after, she had suffered a second stroke, and her health very, very quickly deteriorated. She actually died on December 29th, 1945, at age 67. Ed was completely devastated by her death. At this point, he had lost his father, his brother, and now his mother, and he had essentially felt completely alone in the world. After his mother's death, he held on to the farm, and he continued doing those odd jobs that he and Henry had done. He was so hurt by his mother's death that he had actually boarded up any room in the house that had been used by her. So the upstairs, the downstairs parlor, the living room, these rooms stayed in perfect, absolute pristine condition, while the rest of the house, it essentially went to hell. He lived in a small room next to the kitchen, distancing himself from these memories in this house of his mother. It was during this time that Ed had started to become obsessed with death cult magazines and adventure stories. He particularly liked the ones that were revolving around cannibals or Nazis. 2 years after his mother's death, on November 16th, 1957, a woman named Bernice Warden had went missing. She owned a local hardware store. A resident had said that they had seen the store's truck being driven out from the rear of the building around 9:30 a.m. The store was closed all day, and a lot of the locals had attributed it to being deer hunting season. Bernice's son, however, just so happened to be Deputy Sheriff Frank Warden. He went to the store around 5 p.m., and he had found the cash register open along with bloodstains on the floor. He had told investigators that a man, Ed Gein, had been in the store the night prior to his mother's disappearance, and that he was supposed to return the next morning for antifreeze. Later that same day, Ed was actually arrested at a West Plainfield grocery store, leading to the Waushara County Sheriff's Department searching his farm. Upon arrival, a deputy actually found Bernice Warden's decapitated body in a shed on his property. It was hung upside down by her legs with a crossbar at her ankles and ropes around her wrists. The torso had basically been gutted like a deer. She had been shot with a .22 caliber rifle, so any mutilations that Ed had done on her were done post-mortem. When authorities got around to searching the actual house, they found so much stuff. I'm not even kidding you. It literally took up an entire notebook page for me to write down all the stuff that they had found in his house. They found a whole human bones and fragments, a wastebasket made of human skin covering several chairs, skulls on his bedposts, female skulls, some with the top sawed off, bowls made from skulls, a corset made from a female torso, skin from the shoulder to waist, leggings made from skin, masks made from the skin of female heads, a woman named Mary Hogan's face mask in a paper bag, Mary Hogan's skull in a box, Bernice Warden's entire decapitated head in a burlap sack, Bernice Warden's heart in a plastic bag in front of Ed's pot-bellied stove. They found 9 vulva in a shoebox, a young girl's dress with the vulvas of 2 females estimated to be about 15 years old, a belt made from human nipples, 4 noses, a pair of lips on a window shade drawstring, a lampshade made from the skin of a human face, and fingernails from a female's hand. Now, after the police and the investigators had photographed all of these items, everything was actually destroyed. So he was brought in for questioning, and when questioned, Ed told the investigators that between 1947 and 1952, he had made about 40 nighttime visits to 3 local graveyards to exhume recently buried bodies, while he was in what he described as a daze-like state. Now, this is what I meant earlier when I said that I truly believe that Ed Gein had some sort of dissociative disorder, because that would put him in this haze-like state, and even possible personality disorder, because even a personality disorder could put you in this state where you don't really know, it's kind of like a haze to you. So I truly think that along with the schizophrenia that he was diagnosed with, that he quite possibly had a dissociative disorder or some sort of personality disorder. So he had also stated that during about 30 of these visits, he had actually snapped out of the daze, and he had left the graves untouched, and he actually returned home empty-handed. Now, during the other visits, approximately 10, Ed had dug up recently buried women that he believed resembled his mother in age and looks. He'd then take the bodies home, and he would tan their skins to make his paraphernalia. Now, another point of his grave robbing was to make a woman suit so that he could pretty much become his mother. He did deny ever having sex with the bodies, stating very plainly that just they smelled too bad. He did also admit to the shooting of Mary Hogan, a tavern owner that had been missing since 1954. However, he denied having any memory of her death. So, during the questioning, Washora County Sheriff Art Sheely, I believe it's pronounced, he had actually reportedly assaulted Ed by banging his head and his face into a brick wall. Now, I can completely understand why this man did this. I mean, seeing all these gruesome crimes that this man committed, and not knowing, and then finally catching him and just having him say things so plainly, like, well, I didn't fuck the bodies because they smelled too bad. Like, I can completely understand where this guy's anger is coming from. So due to this, Ed's confession was actually deemed inadmissible. So Sheely later died of a heart failure at age 43 in 1968, right before Ed's trial. Now, many who knew Sheely said that he was traumatized by Ed's crimes. He believed this and the fear of having to testify after assaulting Ed actually led to his heart failure. So on November 21st of 1957, Ed was arraigned on 1 count of first-degree murder in Washora County Court, where he pled not guilty by reason of insanity. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and found mentally unfit for trial, and he was sent to the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, and he was later transferred to the Mendota Hospital in Madison, Wisconsin. So they revisited this in 1960. Doctors determined that Ed was actually mentally able to confer with counsel and participate in his defense, and the trial began on November 7th, 1968. And that was right after Sheely had died. And that was when Sheely would have had to testify. So a psychiatrist did wind up testifying that Ed had come to him and stated that he did not know whether the killing of Bernice Worden was intentional or accidental. He had told the psychiatrist that while he was examining a gun in Worden's store, the gun went off, killing Worden. He had testified that after trying to load a bullet into the rifle, it discharged. He said he had not aimed the rifle at Worden and that he had no recollection of the rest of the morning. Now, this is, again, leading me back to that dissociative disorder. I really, truly believe that he might have had some sort of dissociative disorder. And I hate to keep coming back to that, but like, it really gets me that, you know, they hadn't diagnosed him with this. But at the same time, back then, dissociative disorders probably were not very widely known or diagnosed at that time, if they were known at all. So the defense for this trial had actually requested that the trial was held without a jury, and the verdict was decided by Judge Robert H. Golmar. He was found guilty on November 14th. However, there was a second trial, once again questioning his sanity. And during that trial, after testimony from multiple doctors, Golmar ruled Ed not guilty by reason of insanity and ordered him to be committed to the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane. He lived out the rest of his life in a mental institute, and when he was transferred to the Mendota Mental Health Institute, that is where he died. He died due to respiratory failure that was secondary to lung cancer on July 26, 1984, and he was age 77 when he had died. Now, a little something that I found while doing my research on Ed Gein was that he had had a 1949 Ford sedan and was actually sold at a public auction, and they sold it for $760, which now that's worth around maybe $6,600, somewhere around there. And they sold it to the carnival sideshow operator Bunny Gibbons. Now, Bunny Gibbons set it up at his carnival as a side attraction, and he actually charged carnival goers 25 cents to see it. Now, as far as pop culture goes with Ed Gein, there are countless references to him. I mean, probably the most popular reference to Ed Gein is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There are a few movies of that out now, and that is very, very heavily based on Ed Gein. Aside from that, there is also the movie Psycho. Well, the book Psycho first, and then the movie Psycho. Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses and Devil's Rejects were also heavily based on him. Hitchcock, Bates Motel, and even Silence of the Lambs. Silence of the Lambs, Buffalo Bill was very heavily portrayed, well, meant to be based on Ed Gein. A lot of musicians have actually drawn inspiration from him as well, such as Slayer, Mudvayne, and the Ziggins. And that's all I have on Ed Gein. If you have any fun facts that you know about Ed Gein, please comment down below. If you'd like to get a shout out next week, as I said at the beginning, I'm going to give you guys 3 hints on to who next week is going to be about. If you think that you know who it is, please subscribe and comment down below with your guess. Now, your 3 hints. This serial killer had 33 victims at least. He was active between the years of 1972 and 1978. And this person died by execution by lethal injection. Now again, he had at least 33 victims, was active between 1972 and 1978, and he died by execution by lethal injection. Now, if you think you know who this is, as I said, subscribe, comment down below, and if you guess it, you'll get a shout out on next week's episode. Thank you very, very much for listening to Penny's Playtime. Until next time.